Welcome back to One Idjit's Thoughts On podcast. I'm Paul Mackey. Today is a Duluth hot day. It's about 90 degrees out there, but much cooler in the back of Measure for Measure on 4th Street, so I decided to work on the podcast. I'm betting you've noticed a gap in the Gravity Falls coverage. Let's see, there's 41 episodes of Gravity Falls. I've looked at 12. That leaves 29 episodes to go. And it's mid-July. I think I've given enough hints for now, so let's look for today at Whiz Kids Episode 4, Candidate for Murder, originally aired November 2nd, 1983. That day of note. On that day, Ronald Reagan signed into law the bill officially commemorating the third Monday in January as Martin Luther King Jr. Day as a federal holiday. In music, the number one song in the U.S. was once again the Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton cover of Islands in the Stream. In the U.K., the number one song was Uptown Girl by Billy Joel. I've tried looking up college radio charts, and I did happen to find one from New Music Report, later known as CMJ, for this week. It's a little hard to interpret because some of the titles are clearly albums where others are definitely singles. In any case, the number one title on college airwaves the following week was Numbers with Wings EP by The Bongos, a power pop band out of Hoboken, New Jersey. The top 5 movies in ascending order were number 5, All the Right Moves, number 4, The Big Chill, number 3, The Dead Zone, number 2, Never Say Never Again, and debuting at number 1, Richard Pryor's stand-up/documentary film Here and Now. So on to Whiz Kids Episode 4, Candidate for Murder. Brief summary. Hamilton is working on asking Alice out on a date. After a few missed attempts, he settles on a midnight showing of Rocky Horror Picture Show, but he needs to find out transport, and she needs her dad to say yes. Jeremy is trying to figure out someone to interview for an assignment and decides to interview a state senator and candidate for governor, John Boyd. He goes through all sorts of obstacles in getting this done. After all, it's a big assignment he's put off till the last minute. John Boyd is seen talking to the press about gathering evidence to compel the extradition of a man called Miles Loring, a pyramid schemer. We see a man taking pictures of a model of an Apollo landing module in a park, but then nearby, Senator Boyd is meeting Miles Loring in a limo, taking a sizable bribe payment in the form of a suitcase full of cash. Loring sees the guy taking pictures and sends one of his goons, Hicks, after the guy, who turns out to be a photographer for the Gazette. Hicks questions him at knife point and takes his camera. The photographer still has the roll of images he took in the park, at least. Back at the Gazette, Arbus, the photographer, is working in the darkroom with Farley, trying to figure out what's important about the pictures, but blowing up the background won't wind up with workable images. Arbus suggests computer enhancement might help. While Farley is at Richie's getting a closer look at the photos, Hicks is working on tracking him down. Farley recognizes Loring in one of the photos, but not Boyd. When he goes to tell Arbus what he finds him on the floor of the darkroom, dead. Hicks fakes his way back into the crime scene and overhears Farley arguing with Lieutenant Quinn about whether the printout of the computer-enhanced image shows Loring, and Farley says he's going to get his editor to run the story. Hicks sneaks into the Gazette and steals the photo and negatives. However, Richie still has the data. The computer runs the photo, which Richie enhanced further for better detail, and Loring and Boyd argue over what is next. Boyd announces to the press the investigation of Loring is effectively cancelled from lack of evidence. Richie looks at license plates in one of the photos and gets a partial plate number, telling Farley, who will try to get him access to the DMV database to try to get a match to the limo. Jeremy decides to try to use the license plate number to give to Boyd and get his interview. Farley uses a ruse with Quinn to ostensibly try to look up the partial plate in the DMV database, but instead copies Quinn's access code for the DMV for Richie. Jeremy goes to Boyd's office, but unfortunately tells Hicks about the phone number, thinking he's just with the campaign. Richie's search shows the car is registered to the Boyd campaign, just as Jeremy is shown to Boyd's office. Hicks tells Boyd he's going to dump Jeremy in the ocean. Farley and the gang get to Boyd's office too late, hear the senator is heading for the beach, and assume Jeremy is in the car. Richie gets Farley to get an access code for the freeway system master control computer. Richie does everything he can think of to slow traffic on the Santa Monica freeway, from altering the ramp traffic metering lights to making false alerts on the traffic control warning displays, oil slicks, hippo crossings, poison gas, and the like. While Quinn works on getting cops to the scene, Richie types messages on the displays to Jeremy himself, telling him, in personal references, that Boyd is the other one in the photos and to get out now. Jeremy escapes, and after a chase sequence, arrests are made. He reports on the whole thing to his class, but receives lower marks, due to not completing the interview assignment completely. Ham gets Alice to agree on a simpler date that doesn't involve a midnight movie or borrowing his brother's car. All right, my favorite line.
And the lady has the French fries. The gentleman has the tuna pork supreme.
Yeah.
I cannot imagine a world in which that dish exists. And yet, Google returns results for pork with tuna sauce. I will second Alice's revulsion in that case. Who is Query? I'll point out that James Luisi in the role of Hicks had a recurring part on Rockford Files, so perhaps we'll be profiling him at a later date. Also of note, Frances Marshall Laborto, mother of Matthew who plays Richie, was in the episode as the English teacher. But today, we'll look at Andrea Elson in the series regular role of Ellis Tyler. Andrea was born in 1969 in New York City. Her father was in advertising, and the family traveled the country extensively. At age 11, she was in a 6th grade production of Alice in Wonderland, and she realized a love for acting. She was able to get a commercial agent shortly afterwards and began appearing in commercials. She was 14 when she got the role of Alice Tyler in Whiz Kids. She and Todd Porter were the cast members playing closest to their on-screen ages, Jeffrey Jacquet and Matthew Laborto being 18 years old. I have to briefly interrupt this bio to mention the Forgotten TV podcast and Chris Cooling. I was working on finding more information to keep these episodes interesting, and I stumbled upon the Whiz Kids page on Facebook. I DM'd the page, and it turns out to be run by Chris Cooling, who also produces the Forgotten TV podcast, and he has a full set of episodes about Whiz Kids. I have listened to some of his Whiz Kids content, though I'm holding off on the episode-by-episode breakdown and behind-the-scenes stuff until I'm finished with this, but I am listening to the interviews. All this to say, I listened to Chris's interview with Andrea Elson, and she told Chris the reason for all the flirting between AJ Simon and Alice in the last episode was because Andrea herself had a big crush on Jameson Parker and couldn't stop staring at him. It was easier to write it in than shoot around it, I suppose. After Whiz Kids was cancelled, Andrea had a single episode appearance on Silver Spoons, and not too long later, scored the role for which most people will remember her, Lynn Tanner, on Alf. Alf ran for 4 seasons from 1986 to 1990, and at some point later in production she developed a relationship with stage manager Scott Hopper. They were both in their early 20s at this point, so please don't think I'm describing something inappropriate. They married a few years after Alf ended and are still married today with 2 children, both in their 20s themselves. After Alf, she had more single-episode appearances on Who's the Boss, Parker Lewis Can't Lose, Married with Children, Mad About You, and Step by Step. Then she had a role on The Young and the Restless. Not too long after the birth of her first child, she realized the grind of a daily soap opera wasn't compatible with how she wanted to raise kids, so she decided to move on from acting. She went into yoga instruction and now operates her own yoga studio. That week in tech. The photo manipulation Richie was doing, of course, falls outside the realm of realism, but if he were to work with photos in 1984, he'd probably be using a Quantel paintbox system. Not that Ralph was likely to have a Quantel paintbox system incorporated. One factor would be the cost, $250,000, equivalent to about $756,000 today. Eventually, this system was mainly known for video work, but until Photoshop rolled out in 1985, the Paintbox was the go-to for digital graphics work. The Paintbox operated with a stylus pen and tablet input. The stylus and monitor Richie used was more visually interesting to a TV audience, no doubt. Not too long after Whiz Kids, Quantel systems were used in production of Star Trek The Next Generation. Quantel's hardware-based systems eventually moved to primarily software-based solutions, but it was still a major player for quite a while, being used in production of Star Wars Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, The Day After Tomorrow, and Sin City. Quantel bought or merged with several companies over the years and has been absorbed into the Grass Valley Company. Totally 80s. The bad guys had car phones. And somewhat the opposite, Quinn should be much more reachable, but his pager is broken, which is a plot device that is presently commonplace whenever they need to write around the now ubiquitous cell phones. Artifactoids, I was able to find the Firehouse Taverna at 18463 Victory Boulevard in Reseda or Tarzana, depending on who's listing it. It looks like it's been significantly renovated, enclosing or replacing the open-air seating in front, but you can still see the roof peak on the side and some version of the bell structure on top. The website says the current business was established in 1995, so it's clearly not the same owners from 1984, and they seem to be going for an all-Greek menu with a sit-down dine-in experience. What worked? It did a good job of showing the twists and coincidences leading to Jeremy's predicament. Also, there's an improved tying together of the kids' plotline and the adult intrigue. I also liked that Jeremy was in actual peril once more. I think the plotting of the episode outshines any of the negatives of what didn't work. And that's mostly the stretches of believability with the computers. Sure, they were extrapolating into the future, and yes, even today, some people believe in what TV Tropes calls the enhance button. It was still pretty obvious, where there were scenes that might have included Richie illegally hacking civic computer systems, but instead had the adult authority figure obtain access codes. Also, it was kind of funny that an entire office of workers just sat and watched while Richie worked on stopping their boss. Maybe they were all convinced he was a crook in some big scene that happened off-screen. Hey, once again, before we leave, I'd like to tell you to check out the Forgotten TV podcast. If you're enjoying the kind of thing I'm doing here, you should find plenty to enjoy there as well. Chris Cooling presents lots of information, and you can really tell he enjoys the subject matter. He has a journalist's eye for detail and does extensive research on the shows he's featuring. So next time is Whiz Kids, Episode 5, A Chip Off the Old Block. And I do appreciate the chip in that title. Happy hunting! You've been listening to the One Idjit's Thoughts On podcast, produced by Paul Mackey in association with Nimlas Studios. Any short clips of audio from shows is included under fair use for commentary purposes, and copyright for that content remains with its original copyright holders. The theme song is Too Good by Jack Mangan and is used by his generous permission. One Idjit's Thoughts is produced under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. You can find more episodes of this podcast and many other fine podcasts at nimlas.org. You can contact me by emailing idjitcastpodcast@gmail.com or commenting on episodes at nimlas.org.
Let's make our own memories.
All right, enhance that. All right, enhance that corner. All right, enhance right in the middle. Enhance the kid. Enhance the comic book. Enhance that bottom panel.